The stories featured in Greeking Out are original adaptations of classic Greek myths. This week's story features flying into a rage, contests lost that should have been won, bad test for finding a life partner, the goat of Greek mythology, and hairy butts. Are we allowed to say that?
Welcome back to another episode of Greeking Out. Once again, we're telling you a story about the mighty Heracles. Yeah, okay, I know. We've done a lot of stories about Heracles on this podcast, but that makes sense because he's probably one of the best known, if not the best known hero in Greek mythology.
The 12 labors of Heracles are his most famous adventures, but there are many more stories about him.
Right, and this time our story catches Heracles in a different part of his life. This is grown-up Heracles. He's older, he's more famous, he's been a hero for a while now, and you have to wonder if maybe he's looking for something different, something to build his life around other than just, adventuring. You might remember that he did have a family a long time ago in Thebes, but that ended in tragedy, and he was younger back then. Maybe Heracles wants to try again.
Perhaps you are biased because you are a big fan of fatherhood.
I am. I love being a father, and I do sort of get where Heracles is coming from. I mean, you can only be young and adventurous for so long. Maybe it starts to lose its luster after a while. I suspect that's true even for demigods. Eventually, you get to a new stage in your life where you're ready to take on different adventures. That's when Heracles hears about the challenge from King Eurytus.
Eurytus ruled over a small kingdom in Thessaly called Oechalia.
In addition to being a king, Eurytus was an expert archer. In fact, he was so famous for his skill with a bow and arrow that Zeus himself commanded him to teach archery to a young Heracles many, many years ago. Heracles had spent a lot of time with King Eurytus and his family learning his skill with arrows. Heracles even got to know Eurytus' sons, and they became friends. Now, King Eurytus also had a daughter named Iole, who was a keen archer and very interested in getting married. Like Heracles, she was ready to have a family and had petitioned her father to find her a husband. Unfortunately, in King Eurytus' opinion, there was a shortage of quality prince material in the region, so he decided to hold an archery contest to marry off his daughter.
Similar to deciding who rules a kingdom with a breath-holding contest, an archery contest is not the best way to pick a life partner.
Yeah, we've gone through a couple of bad ways to choose, but this one's up there. I mean, how about we have a diaper-changing competition or a take my side in a fight even though I'm wrong competition? These would be useful competitions to find people to spend your life with, right?
Male bowerbirds build elaborate nests and perform complicated dances to impress potential mates.
Yeah, exactly. Have them build her a house or something. At least that's useful, but anyway, King Eurytus decreed that any man who could beat or match him and his sons in this archery contest would be able to marry his daughter. Heracles was ready to compete and win the hand of Iole, and Heracles could never pass up the opportunity to prove he was the best at anything. You might say it was kind of his Achilles heel. Either way, Heracles was locked in. So he traveled across Thessaly and made his way to Oechalia, where he planned to discreetly enter the contest and win the hand of the princess. Heracles hid beneath his heavy cloak and entered the contest in secret, not wanting any special treatment from his old friends, nor wanting to scare off any of the competition. He wanted to win this contest on his own. Soon, the steward of King Eurytus read the list of challengers before an anxious crowd. Diodorus of Tyrins, Argus from Crete, Halman from Athens, Heracles from... Wait, Heracles? The Heracles? The crowd began to gasp and murmur and looked from person to person. Suddenly, Heracles felt a little uncomfortable as people began to gawk at him. Okay, maybe a lot uncomfortable. He pulled the hood of his cloak down a little further and tried to play it off like a case of mistaken identity.
What? No, that's not my name. It says, Harry Cheese. Not Heracles. No, Harry Cheese.
Your name is Harry Cheese?
Yep, sure is. Harry Cheese from Parma. That's a super normal name in Parma.
The steward rolled his eyes and shrugged. Parents will name their kids anything these days. And moved on to the next name on the list. Soon, all of the competitors lined up with their bows and arrows and began shooting at targets one by one. Heracles never missed the bullseye. From the royal viewing box, Iole gestured for servants to push the targets further and further away each round, but again and again, Heracles hit the target with ease. One by one, the other archers were edged out of the competition, and soon it was just Heracles and King Eurytus' son, Iphitos, Heracles' old friend. The two archers nodded at each other in respect. By this point, the target seemed like a tiny little circle way off in the distance, barely visible. But the prince launched his arrow into the air, and it fell in a perfect arc, striking the target. The crowd cheered. Then it was Heracles' turn. He pulled the string back as far as the bow would allow. He focused his eyes and his mind on the target and let the arrow fly. The shot was straight and true, and Heracles' arrow once again found the bullseye. He had won the competition. But by now, King Eurytus and Iphitos both were very suspicious of this Harry Cheese guy. In addition to being overly large and muscular, there was something familiar about him. As he watched the archer sling his bow over his back, the pieces came together, and King Eurytus exclaimed,
Heracles, is that you?
Once again, the crowd parted, and Heracles found himself standing awkwardly in the palace courtyard, surrounded by people staring at him, dumbfounded.
It is him. Look, it's Heracles.
Yeah, hi. I was, I was just thinking that I would, give it a shot. Get it? A shot? Because you shoot an arrow with a bow and
Apparently, Heracles had also reached the age of dad jokes.
The best age, in my opinion. As far as the contest, though, no one was quite sure how to proceed. Heracles had clearly won, but
Eurytus and Iphitos were concerned.
yeah, and I don't entirely blame them. King Eurytus and his steward were whispering back and forth to each other, glancing sideways at the hero standing alone in the center of the square. Iphitos was hovering awkwardly off to one side. The vibes were definitely off here. After a few moments, the king spoke directly to Heracles.
The mighty Heracles, it is a thrill and an honor to welcome you to our kingdom, and may I say it is wonderful to see you again.
But it wasn't really. Eurytus was obviously very familiar with Heracles and the demigod's skills, but he was also familiar with the rumors about Heracles and what happened in Thebes.
The goddess Hera cast a spell upon Heracles, which drove him into madness. He subsequently destroyed most of the city of Thebes, including his own wife and children.
Right. And even though it wasn't really his fault, that's not something you can expect people to forget about you. And there was no way that King Eurytus was going to let this happen to his daughter and or his grandchildren.
This is an example of what is known in today's dating culture as a red flag.
Unfortunately, I do not feel that you and my daughter would be a good fit,
King Eurytus said gently.
Your skill is legendary, and your talent certainly comes straight from the gods. You are far greater than my own small kingdom deserves. It would be unfair to allow you to win this competition and burden you with this unworthy responsibility, the king continued. It just doesn't seem right. Sorry, the contest is closed. Thank you for coming.
The crowd began to murmur and looked back and forth at each other. Everybody could feel the awkwardness. The unfairness of it all struck Heracles like a slap in the face.
But I obviously won the competition.
Well, technically, somebody named Harry Cheese won the competition, the king replied. But I do see your point. Still, I'm afraid I can't allow you to marry my daughter for everyone's sake. Thank you for playing. Can I offer you a pair of my finest horses? A flock of my woolliest sheep? Cattle?
Iole watched this, not knowing what to do. She respected her father's decisions generally, but this seemed kind of unfair, right? And okay, there was the whole destruction of Thebes thing, but surely Heracles learned his lesson. Heracles was understandably bummed, and he had seen enough cattle to last the rest of his life, so he definitely didn't want Eurydice's. To be honest, he was more than a little angry. He wasn't often denied something that he wanted this badly. Ultimately, though, Heracles respected King Eurydice, and he might have been willing to let the whole thing go, until Iphitos made a bad decision. He started to brag.
Whoa, hold up. You mean I beat the mighty Heracles in an archery competition?
He said with a big smile.
Oh man, I am the greatest archer ever. Hera who? Heracles? Please. Yeah, who's the man? I'm the man. That's right, I'm the man. Yeah, Hera who? Hera me.
Well, Heracles didn't take this very well. He lashed out, throwing a punch at Iphitos' bragging face. He didn't think about how he was a demigod and so much more stronger than he was when he was a kid the last time he was here. And this time, there was no Hera around to blame. Heracles killed Iphitos in front of King Eurytus, Iole, and the whole kingdom.
In another version of this same story, a very disappointed Heracles leaves Oechalia, but winds up getting accused of stealing some cattle, which leads to him killing Prince Iphitos.
Yeah, that's right. There are a few different versions of this story, but today we're going to go with the one that has fewer cows. King Eurytus was devastated by the loss of his son. In moments, Heracles was surrounded by the entire royal guard with swords and spears pointed at him from all sides. Yes, he probably could have fought them all off, but Heracles realized, correctly, that that would be a bad move. He remembered what had happened in Thebes all too well, and he was afraid of that happening again. He had already gone too far, and he knew it. Heracles dropped his weapons and allowed the soldiers to capture him, binding his hands with chains that he easily could have snapped. He spent the night in a dark dungeon cell, regretting his actions, wondering why he let his anger get the best of him. The next morning, he was summoned to the throne room where King Eurytus decided his fate. This was a tricky moment for the king. He may have wanted to sentence Heracles to death, but that would not have been appropriate and maybe even impossible.
Heracles was a demigod and would probably have been very hard to kill. Also, the king did not want to offend the mighty Zeus by putting his son to death.
Right, but King Eurytus felt like he had to punish Heracles in some way, so once again, Heracles was sentenced to servitude. Just like after Thebes, the mighty warrior would be sent off to another kingdom to serve another ruler until his debt to society was paid.
You will travel to the kingdom of Lydia, where you will be indentured to Queen Omphale,
King Eurytus announced.
You will serve at her pleasure until she deems your debt to be repaid.
The king stood tall, despite the devastating grief he was going through, and Iole couldn't even look at Heracles, who she had once considered a good match. Her face was the picture of sadness and regret. And suddenly, without warning, the gods have decreed that we must take a quick commercial break. So we're going to pause for a second, and then we'll be back with more Greeking Out. All right, thanks for that, and thanks for sticking around for more Greeking Out. Heracles was escorted to the edge of town by the royal guards, where they removed the pointless chains and pointed him towards Lydia. Heracles set off for yet another kingdom where he would face his punishment and be forced to work for redemption.
Heracles' famous 12 labors were a punishment put on him by the gods to make up for the destruction of Thebes and his family.
Yeah, this wasn't the first time that Heracles had been in this situation. The kingdom of Lydia was far away from Greece, actually in what we now call Turkey, and the ancient Greeks tended to think of anyone who didn't speak Greek as barbarians. All of this was meant to humble Heracles, being in service to a foreign queen in a place they didn't even speak Greek. Come on! But Queen Omphale was clever and wise, and she knew having Heracles around would definitely make her enemies think twice before trying anything. But she had to find a way to handle such a famous hero, especially one who is quick to overreact with violence. When he reported for duty in Lydia, Queen Omphale could see that Heracles was still seething with anger about the situation with Iole and her father. She knew that what Heracles needed was to learn some self-control.
Steps to expressing your emotions appropriately include naming your emotions, identify what triggers those emotions, and learning to manage your emotions in those situations.
It sounds like you're angry.
Queen Omphale said to Heracles after he told her the whole story.
Of course I'm angry.
Heracles said,
I'm the best at archery, and I won that contest, but they won't admit it.
You are a very strong warrior,
Queen Omphale conceded.
and I'm glad you're here. I have just the job for you.
Heracles was excited at the prospect of being useful and showing off his skills. Queen Omphale pulled him over by the fire and handed him something soft and fuzzy. It was yarn wrapped around a piece of wood. She then stood in front of a wall of strings Heracles knew had to be a loom and started to weave. Queen Omphale took the stick with the yarn from Heracles, pulling the stick and its yarn through a bunch of strings lined up in front of her, and then handing him the stick again so she could straighten the line of yarn. At the bottom of the loom, each of the strings were weighted down in bundles with heavy rocks, keeping the strings taut.
So, you need me to, defeat a giant boar? Or are we going to war with your enemies, or what?
Heracles asked as Queen Omphale continued to weave before him.
Oh no, this kingdom is quite peaceful generally,
The queen said as she concentrated on her loom.
but I do need someone to help me with the weaving. It's so tiring holding on to the shuttle while straightening the weft. This is a big help.
Well, this was a bit much for Heracles to take. He was someone who defined himself by being the biggest, strongest warrior around. He could accomplish anything. Hydra, slain. Lion, vanquished. But yarn craft? The calluses on his hands kept catching on the fine yarn even as he was handing it to Queen Omphale. And when he tried to weave himself, he kept on getting the different parts of the loom confused, and his thick fingers weren't always so quick to pull the threads through. He kept on getting it wrong and having to undo the weaving and start again. This was a lesson in patience, in yarn craft, but most importantly, in controlling his emotion.
This loom is tangling all by itself.
No, it's not.
Oh, man, now it's tangling the other way. Oh, man, I ought to break this thing.
If you break my loom, you will be making me another one.
This loom is already broken. This thing's totally busted. It tangles thread for no reason. Oh, come on. Look at this. Come on. Oh, man.
It was frustrating to say the least. But Queen Omphale kept a cool head and patiently showed Heracles over and over again how to work the loom. Soon enough, Heracles was starting to get the hang of it. If he made a mistake, he learned to take a deep breath and carefully unmake it. Things had always come easily to Heracles because he was born a demigod, and now he was really being put to the test. Eventually, Heracles found some chill in the quiet contemplation of tasks like spinning and weaving. It was very different from fighting, but it still required a lot of concentration and focus.
Weaving is one of the oldest crafts in the world, and each household used to have to produce the cloth they would need in their lives.
Finally, after long months of learning to control his emotions and work through failure, Queen Omphale had something else for Heracles to do. She had been receiving complaints of bandits attacking traders and travelers as they made their way to and from the city. Most of the time, these attacks occurred in the woods that surrounded Sardis, their capital, so Heracles was sent to investigate. Our hero strapped on his bow and arrow over top of his handmade silk clothing and made his way into the nearby forest where he spent the day crashing through the underbrush and finding, well, nothing. Whoever these bandits were, they were certainly good at hiding themselves. Night was approaching, and Heracles decided he should probably just set up camp and pick up the search in the morning. As he was dozing by his campfire with the embers slowly dying out, Heracles heard a noise. It was very faint and barely audible, but Heracles recognized the sound of a creature breathing. He could tell something was up, but he didn't want to miss his chance. Without moving his body, Heracles slowly opened one eye and caught a glimpse of a small, goblin-like creature quietly rooting through his knapsack. It had a pot belly, pointy ears, and was holding one of Heracles' famous poison arrows in his tiny fist. In one swift movement, Heracles jumped up and grabbed the creature by its legs, hanging it upside down.
Hey, don't touch that!
Heracles yelled.
That's poison!
The creature screamed in outrage, and its scream was followed by another yell right behind Heracles. The warrior swung around just in time to avoid a spear flung at his head by a second little creature. Heracles pounced and grabbed the other goblin by its feet, hanging it upside down as well. In moments, he had tied both of them up and left them hanging by their ankles from a nearby tree branch. Heracles was breathing hard, and emotions were running wild through him, but he forced himself to take a deep breath, calm down, and control his emotions.
Well,
He said calmly to himself.
I guess I found my bandits.
And indeed he had. These mischievous bandits were known as the Kerkopes, a pair of dwarf-like twin brothers who had enjoyed nothing more than messing with humans. Their favorite pastime was stealing things just for the fun of it.
Most of the references to the Kerkopes depict them as a pair of brothers. Usually, they are shown next to Heracles, bound and hanging upside down on either side of a pole.
Exactly as they are here. And they were pretty lucky that Heracles had learned something from Queen Omphale. The sun was just starting to rise, so Heracles broke down his camp, slung the branch holding the two thieves over his shoulder like a maid balancing two sloshing buckets of water as she ferried them homeward, and began marching back to the city with his two prisoners dangling behind him. Within a few moments, he heard giggling. Then the giggling turned into a high-pitched laughter.
What's so funny?
Heracles demanded.
Your butt!
The first creature replied.
We can see right through the silk. It's so hairy.
The other brother cackled in agreement.
Yeah, I know. It's just like our mother predicted. We thought she was joking when she told us about a prophecy warning us of the man with hairy buttocks. Who knew? Hey, maybe that's why they call him Heracles. Heracles?
Okay, that is pretty ridiculous. Very ridiculous.
A note to our audience here. Like all our stories, we did not make this up. Heracles canonically has a hairy butt.
Yeah, this sounds crazy, but everyone from Herodotus to Ovid and beyond have mentioned Heracles' hairy butt. Maybe you thought the ancient Greeks were all prophecies and heroic quests, but there are jokes about butts in there too. For his part, Heracles just laughed at the thieves' antics and brought them back to Queen Omphale to decide their fate. The queen was impressed by Heracles' restraint, and she felt comfortable sending him out on more missions, knowing that he wouldn't overreact and kill everyone involved. Eventually, Heracles' time in Lydia came to an end. His exile was always supposed to be temporary, and he was eventually allowed to return home to Greece. But what would he do next?
We have to wait until the next episode before we find this out. You have talked too much already.
Well, I mean, there's a whole lot of story left. We could just get a little bit more going.
Also, you are out of coffee.
Okay, well, that's it for this episode of Greeking Out, but there's a lot more to this new batch of Heracles adventures. Too much to put in only one episode, so come back next week for more Heracles and more Greeking Out.
Thank you for listening. Join us next episode as we talk more about Heracles and his adventures with a special guest.
Freaking out, gods and heroes, amazing feats. Listen and you'll see it's freaking out.
This episode of National Geographic Kids Greeking Out is written by Jillian Hughes and Kenny Curtis, and hosted by Kenny Curtis, with Tori Kerr as the Oracle of Wi-Fi. Audio production and sound design by Scotty Beam, and our theme song was composed by Perry Grip. Dr. Meredith Saffron is our subject matter expert, Emily Gammon and Giovanna Alaimo are our producers, and Emily Everhart is our senior producer.